little piece I was going to pick up from night before last. It was to give me an entree to try and point your direction toward how then is totally unsuitable for someone to do this. It is very important out in the linear world, but then has got to be abandoned. And of course, I guess you might ask me, would you say something about that before we all abandoned it? Well, I hadn't thought about it, but now that you ask, all right. It's this. It's like this. That means here comes an example. E.g. Someone says, I will begin to take that serious. Well, I will begin to take, if they can show me that this is serious, then I will begin to take it personally. If they can show me that the radon gas problem is now serious in this locale and to a homeowner like myself, then I will take it serious. And remember, night before last, I was trying to get you to see that there was not only a connection, not only a synonymous reflection, but in fact, in another sense, an absolute twin brother dynamic between people taking things serious and people, or things being serious, and people taking them personally. You end up dealing with the then I wills. In the city, this is the only way that anything makes any lineal sense. But to do this, to begin to even understand, to begin to suspect where this lies within life's own framework, you can't merely deal with the then I wills. You've got to act as though, and you've got to think as though, such notions as cause and effect, actions and consequences are not in any way separate, not in any manner, that you cannot have this sort of thing. Or you cannot have or you cannot have you can't have it. You can't even think that way. Now, the nervous system as it is now, ordinary consciousness can think no other way. That is a description, that is a living example of what lineal consciousness is how in the world can you react to something before it's happened? For those of you who are interested in such mundane subjects, could I point out to you why prayer doesn't work, as they call it in the city? And if you don't like that, in just a second I'll point out to you why people can't change. If indeed you're living in a lineal world and you appeal to the gods, please help me do so and so. Do you understand that they cannot, if there was, the old idea is that your forefathers still alive in some of you people's nervous system, that still believe that, the time that 3D consciousness tells you that you want to be helped is already taken up by what? By asking for help. You can't be helped right now. If you found the great Poobah somewhere, the great guide, and you said, hey, can you hear me? And he said, okay, yeah, I hear you. You say, can you help me do so-and-so right now? Then if he was the outside force, outside the system it created, of course, he would understand your position, and he would, if he was really in a bad mood or had a few drinks, he might slip up and try to tell you something like I do and say, well, wait a minute. Now, I'll listen, I'll entertain what you're going to ask, but please understand now, let's try and be correctly now that you've got in touch with me right off the bat. I can't help you right now because you just took up right now by asking for help. The prayer itself, the solicitation that you're about to whip on me, if I let you go, it's going to take up the right now. So what it is you want, even if I agree, it's going to be when. And you'd go, later? You'd go, right. Therefore, all throughout history, there have been many ordinary people in the city, which is part of life's use of it, have kicked the idea of prayer because they point out, hey, it never works. And if it does work, it's so late it doesn't matter. If you're dealing with the then I wills, it all moves in a line. Now, not just prayer, so let's skip and move up to where it might seem a little more sophisticated to some of you. All attempts that you make with yourself, all plans that you make to change are dealing with the then I wills. And you're saying I'm going to change now, and you can't change now. And I'm not playing with words. I don't mean some elusive now or right now, that there's just some little second, that there's time flowing over this knife blade cutting the future into the past, and all you've got is just a split second of some now. Not all that. Whatever your conception of now, and most people never have been able to limn their sense of now, but when it's not now, you have some perception of it. If indeed you had prayed to the gods, and you made some sacrifice and some gift, and your friend said, did the prayer pay off? And you realize, hell, I'd forgotten about it, it's been so long, your answer would be no. Because it is no longer a sense of now to you. As I said, most people do not delineate their sense of now from the past or the present until it's too late, until it isn't to the past. And then they realize, well, whatever I'm going to get is not now. If you're expecting a new pony for your birthday when you're 6 years old, whatever a 6-year-old would do, that your father came home, your mother came home, and still no pony, then it might be the sense, I'm not going to get it. Or it might took to the time that you had the cake and you had the little party, and they said, now go to bed. That's enough, go to bed. And then you might think, hey, now is done for. That means I ain't getting the pony. That now is gone. If you get tomorrow, it's still not the same. All ideas of change, if you're going to talk about it, if you're going to stay in conversation, which is, of course, discussing the cost of some change, you can't change now. And I don't mean a little split second right now. Your sense of now. It's never accomplished. No prayer is ever answered. No plan is ever fulfilled. Because now is taken up with a plan. The petitions to the gods can't be answered now because the prayer is taking it up. If you could look around the corner, if you could see that this is tied to something else, that this is simply a partial reflection of a greater phenomenon going on, you would see where I've been pointing about the uses of talk, the increased production that attracts people, the passage of energy, the transformation of energy. But insofar as, in some way, I am going to discuss the cost, / in some way I'm going to make further plans to change, / I am putting together more and more information. I am girding my loins, steeling up my resolve, and I'm getting closer and closer, and you can go ahead and put ... because that's the story of your life. That's the way it's going to be. I am getting closer and closer to ... And finally, of course, everybody knows literally what the ... But finally, all you got to do is wait long enough, and it goes ... and the last one goes over like that into this big old hole in the ground that... and the last dot will carry you. Because it's always based upon somebody trying to change on the basis of, then I will. I will do so and so. If such and such happens, if I begin to spit up blood, if I begin to lose my memory for more than 2 weekends at a time, or more than 5 days in a row, if I begin to stay out of work and try and join a ballet company and forget where I am, if I do that one more time this year, then I'll cut down my drinking. If I beat up my wife 3 or 4 more times and they come and arrest me, if I do it, all right, 3 more times, because my boss said he wasn't going to bail me out again. All right, 3 more times, then I'll seek help. Then I'll try to change. All of that seems to be flamboyant examples that we'll assume is beyond the pale of you people's everyday life. But it's everything else. Even that appears to be subtle. Even that appears to be just connected to this and has nothing to do with the kind of affairs outside in life of cutting down your drinking or starch, or that you won't beat up on somebody. But it's still the feeling, the main reason I was bringing out tonight, with our little short period here, is your sense of time, and specifically your sense of now, which I repeat one more time, this is not theoretical, and I'm not trying to lead you into some intellectual philosophical structuring and building up frameworks. Is to be aware of the fact that you have a sense of now, and no one ever qualifies it, no one ever analyzes it, no one ever thinks about it. It's always on the basis otherwise to what was some previous sense of now. If it's brought out to you or it comes to your mind, is now in the past. Well, that day's gone. It's too late to do that. And then you got to shift around to whatever could have been a now in the past if you're going to revive it. So to somebody saying, I thought you were going to do so-and-so. And you go, uh-oh. And of course you got a ready excuse for some reason. Shift the blame. You know, God wouldn't have made the blame if that wasn't the use for it. That's the primary purpose, is to shift it around. Keep it alive, moving. So at any rate, you explain, no, I didn't do that. But, and then you take what was a previous now. That is, somebody's asking you about what was a previous now. You understand? They say, hey, last time I saw you, you said you were going to do so-and-so. What happened? Because evidently you didn't. You go, ah! And then it strikes you that I can no longer do what I promised to do now. So you don't have to analyze it. You don't even have to blame it on somebody bringing it up. That's part of it. But remember, everything's a part of it. But you're aware of the fact, uh-oh, and then you say, well, blah, 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 blah. And if nothing else, now that it's now back in your consciousness, what appears to be now, you go, I had to change my schedule, but I'm going to do it next week, next year. But it is never in the city sense, line level consciousness, it is never within the framework, it is never within any conception of now. Nobody in the city changes now. People imagine they changed in the past. They can say, yeah, I did. Or they can say, I'm going to tomorrow. But not now, because you can't change now. It's impossible at the city. And so what do you do since you can't change now? You talk about it and you think about it. Yeah, but that's the reason you can't do it. That's why I tried to get you started. What appears to be reasons and cause and effect are not cause and effect. They're the same thing, not theoretically. And you can't change now because you're thinking about it. Prayers cannot be answered now. The room is taken up by the prayers. And if there was this force, this old man or this old woman sitting outside and listening, they couldn't answer what you're asking now because the time and of course the space is filled up with you praying. And they'd have to go, all right. Hurry up and get through and I will. And you get through and let's say that he does it. Goes boom. It's no longer now. You can't even see it was answered. You might not even see it. You might have forgotten about it within a split second. You could have moved. The whole universe could have shifted. It is no longer now, and therefore prayers cannot be answered. Your own prayers. If you decide to do something, it can't be done now. If you're going to discuss the price of it, it can't be bought. If you're going to debate, if you're going to continue to let your own nervous system run through the information that comes out as sound, at least in your own head, what do you call it? Thought. If you're going to listen to that, then you can't hear anything else. If that's what you're going to be entertaining, the party never has to do anything, has to do with actual change. At the ordinary level, and then some, but if you can stop and see this, the then I wills equal now. That carries along the impression in the nervous system of now. That is, if somebody says, I thought you were going to do so-and-so, and you say, well, I did think about it, and I decided that perhaps I was being a bit premature, the stock market wasn't right, the price of sugar had gone down, blah, 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 so I've decided when such and such happens, then I will, blah, blah, blah. Do you understand? Then I will, then comes into the center of this unanalyzed area that I'm telling you that people take as being now, without having a clear definition of it ordinarily. But to say, then I will, constitutes now because you have made a declaration, even if you don't do it publicly, or to somebody else, you've done it to yourself, is when such and such happens. When the line of time, the line of fate, moves right along. When such and such happens, then I will. And that constitutes what seems to cut off and cut out a section between the past and the future. And you take that as, well, I've done something. What have you done? Well, I'm back with the then I wills. And that seems to be a now. It seems to be a present effort of some kind. All you got to do is think it and it's gone. All you got to do is have that energy run through you and you're relieved. And don't argue my words, you're relieved enough that you forget about it for the moment. Because that's all you got to do, is go back into the then I wills, and no matter what you've been confronted with ordinarily. And it doesn't have to be an accusation from apparently out there. It can be your own so-called self-incrimination about, uh-oh, seeing that just reminded me I always promised to do so-and-so. Well, all right, if I put on another 50 pounds, then I'll go on a diet. And that's the end of it, at least right then. Then you say, waitress, another donut, please. That's all you got to do, is then I will constitutes an acceptable sense of now. But do note that this will not move anything. You are still being carried along by the apparent lineal flow. But it will not do anything, and you can't move in that. Yet another reason, if you need another reason, but I'm giving it to you, why you should never tell yourself what you're doing. Never, never, never. Your nervous system is going to insist on doing it and just ignore it. You can learn to treat it in a much more subtle manner. And if that doesn't work, you can learn to ignore it. If that doesn't work, you can learn to hear it. And I assure you, those of you who need practice, that when you move from another city, you brought your AM radio, turn on a talk station as loud as you can all day, and you'll find out that after a little bit, you can go ahead with whatever work you've got to do. Then, turn off the radio, and then realize, hey, the station's not gone. I just never realized it. And you've been going on about your affairs with this going on anyway. You have to be able to abandon the sense, any sense of then I will. Any sense of, all right, here's what I'm going to do. The correct attitude to a more religiously inclined real revolutions in the metaphorical and literal sense. When you find the nervous system saying, well, what we're going to do, and I trust you and I think you will, I hope you will, the more spiritual attitude one should have toward one's nervous system, if nothing else, is like, well, fuck you. Well, something along those lines. I don't know whether, I guess according to your religious background, you can vary it, but it should just be basically, well, you know, fuck you. That is, if nothing else works. If you must get to that kind of religious plateau, but if you can do it in a more direct manner, then of course do so. Does everyone get any kind of sensation, if I may point out, that what I actually try to do verbally, and then what I try to encourage you to do, and what I try to trick you into doing, and where I try to point you, that if you can drag your nervous system over there and get your own feet, if not the bottoms of your trousers, and slips on fire to where you can do it yourself, it's in a sense this kind of talking aspect of whatever the hell this is between you and I all these nights we're taping. It's not, and I don't mean this just on my part, it's to encourage you. I was trying to get you to see that in a sensation, or in a sense, a sensation of what's passing between us when things are flowing right, is to lead you to a kind of multimedia intellectual improvisation. And since so many of you have already read into your little genes talents of various kinds, I know that throughout history and up until today, in the artistic communities have always been much credence given to the notion of spontaneity. That the real good painters, perhaps even the real good composers, if they get a few belts in them, will say, hey, my great stuff, the opening of the Fifth Symphony, I can't tell you, I sit around, it was like I was in a bathtub, you know, playing my little duck, and suddenly I heard da 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 da. You know, this stuff just comes to me. Or sometimes a Picasso or somebody say, I don't know what the hell it means. You know, I go, and I get through and I think, I'm amazed. I love it. And I find other people love it and they pay me for it. But in the so-called artistic communities, there are those who want to talk about spontaneity. Now, those who want to talk about, of course, do not have these moments of suddenly hearing da-da-da-da, and they do not suddenly begin to paint. And it's a picture of a woman, and you see her face from 4 different angles simultaneously, that sort of thing. In other words, they're normally, what would we call them? Critics? Oh, all right. Writers? Okay. Teachers? Okay. And people who would aspire. People who find themselves born into this world and they seem to be short on talent genes of some kind. They're the ones who talk about it. They're the ones who write about it, and I've had people on occasions that got involved with this or just brushed up against this that were just convinced in the beginning that that is the primary thing. Just tell me it is. I just knew it was, and I bet you'll tell me it is. And of course, if I was going to try and help somebody, if that could be done, that start with that attitude, I'd tell them, hell no, it's got nothing to do with it. Because if you got to talk about it, if it is something that you have got to discuss with yourself, then you can't do it to begin with. To assume that we're right now assuming in this little conversation that there is some profit to it. So if you got to talk about it, you can't do it. You got that, don't you? You're supposed to by now. If you got to talk about it right now, you can't do it because you talk about it for one thing. Another thing is if you could do it, it never crossed your mind to talk about it. That's why those who are wired up to do it, the artists, the writers, the painters, that they get them, even the athletes, and say, my God, that swing. We've made photographs of your swing. We've watched it. And we've even had people in sports medicine analyze it. What goes through your mind when you're swinging? And if any of you can see at all, if any of you got any, and they put the mic, the man got no idea. It's like asking somebody, what was on your mind when you saw your daughter jump off the burning building? What was on your mind? What did you think just then? What did you think when the first time in your head you heard da-da-da-dum? What did you think when suddenly the opener, the whole basis for Finnegan's Wake seemed to come upon you, Mr. Joyce? And he goes, well, I was thinking to myself, and if you can hear it all, you people should know what I mean by now. It's not a lie in the city sense, but it's a lie in the sense that the man has no idea what's going on any more than he did when he wrote Finnegan's Wake. He might as well have been in a trance. Anybody that does anything might as well be in a trance. And come to think about it, in the city, of course, it is quite proper to say, as all of you should know since you were born there, and a lot of you still have a mailing address there, you can do anything in a trance. That's the way the city goes on. But then, coevally with that, life has put into people the feeling that there would be some great profit if I could simply be spontaneous. But with people who have to talk about it, and people try it, they try it on stage, they try it, which is another little humor if you don't understand it, that's sort of like the International Association of Hermits, is an improvisational company, a troupe of people improvising. Hey, let's all get together and improvise. What time will we meet? 8:30? No, 8:45. All right. But at any rate, what I was going to say, and some of you are old enough to remember there was attempts to do this during the so-called hippie 60 era, I guess, that people were trying to do such as that. You know, of course, it was tied in with drugs at that time, and they thought it was something new. Of, hey, let's do something, go out not just on stage, but go out and spend your life. In other words, jump out in the street, you know, if you've had enough of those funny mushrooms, if you got the right stuff in you, and you can do it, and of course you got the right stuff in you, you can do it, is, hey, whip off your clothes and paint your neck purple and jump out of the street, especially the middle-aged people that look like they're middle class, and jump out nude and go, ah! And holler, God's a dog! Well, I assume all of you know that kind of thing was passed around through some of the would-be psychedelic cults, some of the kind of help yourself, psychological, feeling movements and all that, but it's absolutely nothing new. People have been thinking that. There's been parts of life's body, it's nothing new, thinking that for thousands of years that, hey, the people here and there in the life's body, that is, the parts of life's own cellular structure somewhere has parts of going, you know, if I just feel like that this kind of itch You know, I feel like I'd be better. I feel like I'd enjoy it. There's something seems to be driving me to be, oh, what should I call it? Spontaneous. But then those who can't do it, then they're left, well, all right, how do you be spontaneous? Yeah. And then those that really get good, that got a yellow circuit going, they think, well, wait a minute. Am I being spontaneous to want to be spontaneous? But if I have to think about it, if I'm going to say, all right, now I'm going to do something, what would be spontaneous for me? Well, certainly that idea I heard about jumping out of an alleyway nude at middle-class Romans here, my fellow citizens, and going, God's a dog. Now, I wouldn't do that, so that's spontaneous. All right, I'll do that tomorrow. But wait a minute, that won't be spontaneous. It strikes people in the city. Some people. It's not, when I say a few people throughout history, it is not totally unheard of for other people to hear about this. It would never entertain somebody jumping out in the street nude and hollering something silly or making faces or jumping up in the middle of mass, you know, going, "Ooh!" But they can hear about something like this, or they read about it, or something bring to attention, and it will strike many people's nervous system for a few seconds of, ooh, like, wouldn't that be fun not to have any, inhibitions? And to them, that's what it would be, is to do something that I'm ashamed to do, something I'm afraid to do, something that I feel sexually repressed and afraid to do. That's still not it. There is an attraction. That was the first thing I wanted all of you to realize, because all of you should hear a little bit about this. You didn't have to take drugs in the 60s, and you didn't have to ever threaten to jump out nude in the street. But all of you, properly involved with this at all, you should feel a little something of yeah. Because part of what you're feeling is being tied to your own nervous system and the limits of what life has made your nervous system. So the feeling that I could be spontaneous is kind of a synonymous expression for saying I wish I could do something other than what I seem to keep doing over and over and over. But as far as being spontaneous, you're almost dealing with going around the corner. You're almost dealing with at least 3.5 dimensions of life. Now I suggest to you, this is almost an aside, but it almost gets attempted. Now I've pointed this out once or twice before with some comedians. There are some musicians that have really pushed it, and I don't mean to hint at anybody because there's nothing you could learn from it, other than the fact that there are people who have tried their best, just ordinary people, have tried their best, such as musicians, that, hey, I'm going maybe improvising by themselves, or even tell a drummer, say it's a horn player of some kind, or even a singer, and I'm going to sing without words, and just give me a little background to make it a little more interesting, and then the person just starts. And if it's playing a horn or using their voices, do-do, 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 do-do. And what they're going to try to do, if they had the yellow circuit operating at all, would they be trying to stay just a little bit, all it takes is this much in the linear world, ahead of what their own nervous system. And in most cases, believe it or not, we're talking about the weight of the matter being down in the red circuits to what my body wants to play. If I can stay just a split second ahead, and forget all this shit that some jazz musicians say, well, I hear whole melodies playing in my mind before I play them. There's some room for that, but if they start playing, and a guy tells you, well, I'm weaving melodies. If he is, he's not improvising. If he was getting close to being truly spontaneous, then the best he could do in the city level, the best he could do would be that split second ahead of what he's going to play, and forget trying to do, I'm going to do something purposefully. It's just, I won't do that. And then whatever comes out is why so-called free-form jazz, to most people's lineal ears, sounds at least disturbing, not very pleasant. Because the closer you get to it, the only time you got in the 3D world is to try not to do what you were going to do. Forget about, I'm going to take some positive stuff, or there's something creative that I can tell you that I'm going to do. It's just, I can tell you that I'm not going to do what I wanted to do. Same way with somebody who was painting on the spot or sketching. If you could stand there and watch Painter X, some guy, and he just did that, and he would lie. That is, in the real sense, it was under his control, or he knew what he was doing. If he said, well, I planned that in a sense, but it was spontaneous. If he was really spontaneous, the best a 3D person can do, a person operating under 3D conditions, is to try and interfere with what they would have done. Now, that's the best they can do. somewhat hesitant to give you a verbal punchline to this tonight. But those of you who can hear it, I can take you close enough that you ought to be able to start filling in your own punchline, that there is an attraction, a built-in attraction in the city, in human life, because part of it has to do with the absolute, unpredictable growth from one level lower than what's going on. In other words, if this was, say, a 10D universe, and we were operating right now at 9D, then growth is always unpredictable, because there's always a piece missing, and you would never guess. That's why it was one reason that people's always believed in gods, and when they did, they always have to say, hey, nobody can understand the gods, because what they're saying is there's a piece of information missing, and they attribute it outside the system. There's always been a God somewhere, and he did all this, and he's got ways of doing things that we don't know about. But all you're saying is, what them knowing it is we are operating with less than complete information. We are operating with consciousness that will not perceive another dimension, at least one more. And so it always looks unpredictable. But then when you're down there, then you become what seems to be too predictable. That's the thing that everybody's dissatisfied. I need to be richer, I need to be famous, whatever seems to be a temporary calamine lotion in the city, I'll try it. And part of it is the intrigue, as I started to say, that they hear the idea about being spontaneous. Jesus, I wish I could. Some guy hears a few comments about being spontaneous, and there he sits in his boxer shorts drinking beer, and he's 45 years old, and he's watching TV, and his feeling of spontaneity probably would be by that time, God, I wish I could just jump up, put on my clothes, suddenly lose 400 pounds, and run out there, leave my wife, and pick up a 19-year-old bitch somewhere. That's spontaneity. And if she said, I'm going to sue you, I'd say, sue, mother. And my kids would holler, Daddy, don't leave us. And I'd say, get the hell out of the way. I never asked your old lady to get pregnant anyway. I didn't want any kids. That would be something of spontaneity. And I didn't do all that just to be crude. Well, for you to see that at the city level, the idea of spontaneity, what I was going to do is give you something to compare it to. That's why I made it so gross, so real life, into it moving into the bushes, away from ordinary city constraints, because that would be the thing of spontaneity in general in the city. But now it's in you people too. But it has to take a slightly different form, as you might imagine. Simply doing something offensive to somebody is not being spontaneous. It is certainly not being spontaneously creative, or it's not being creatively spontaneous. It is not revolutionary. It is not the right kind of multimedia improvisation. Being spontaneous in the revolutionary sense, to be able to improvise, has nothing to do with offending anybody. It has nothing to do with shocking anybody. And it has nothing to do with simply doing that which your nervous system, by city standards, is repressed from doing. That is not it. That does not mean, as all of you should know by now, that there is not some benefit that you might not derive personally from struggling for a time with areas I just enumerated. But that is not being spontaneous. That is not being able to improvise. Being able to improvise would be non-offensive, non-irritating, and it might not even necessarily be seen by the audience of the world. And it would not be, in any sense, a negative act. It would not simply be that, all right, I'm going to do that, which I wouldn't ordinarily do. Because then you can say, all right, I'm going to be a spontaneous talker right now, I'm going to try to do it. And let us say that you just suddenly stood up and you just came out with a string of expletives that you just were foul-mouthed and you just began to curse the whole world. And you can say, ooh, no, I'm not that sort. You know me, I'm not that sort. So I was being spontaneous. Let me take where I started this paragraph a little further. I was going to give you some descriptions that I always like to say came to mind. I always like to say that. I don't know why. I guess because there's a why. No. It came to mind. It sounds clerical. I guess I always wanted to be a clerk. That you could refer to this not only as a kind of multimedia intellectual improvisation, you could see it as a kind of trashing of lineal thought. You could see it as a kind of compound dimensional creativity. That's sort of like trashing linear thought. Turn it over. You got to turn the tape over. Don't go away unless you go away. There's another sense, if you can catch it, of how the inability to actually be spontaneous is tied into the then I wills, and its synonymous basis with the unanalyzed sense of now, because you cannot be spontaneous now in the city sense. You can dream about being spontaneous, that is, plan about it, and then afterwards you can ask yourself, did I improv? Was I improvising that much? Was I spontaneous? But a person can't imagine the city sense of being spontaneous now, because if they're imagining being spontaneous now, the now is being taken up by the imagination. The only way that a horn player, a musician, could be spontaneous in a sense would be to have no sensation of time, because you could not have any sensation of, hey, God, all my life I've been trying to sound like Charlie Parker on Speed, or Charlie Parker into a fourth dimension. I've been trying to sound like Ornette Coleman with a deranged sense of harmony. And I believe I about got it. All right, if somebody did that, then right then you do understand they ain't got it. Even if they had it for a moment, they ain't got it. There's a way in which time seems to be the great separator. I think it was some New Age physicist probably, or some hippie physicist in our lifetime, that somebody said that their definition was time was the thing that man discovered to keep everything from running together. And in that sense, it would seem that time is the separator, that it does keep everything from running together. It makes linear thought possible. But at any rate, it seems to keep things from running together. But there is a revolutionary sense, if you can begin to get a 4D view of things, that absolutely, as opposed to this sensation that time, if for nothing else, separates things, where we can think about it, where we can deal with it, and it just keeps everything from becoming kidney stew or Brunswick stew. There's another way to see that what is called the sense of time in the city is actually the great unifier. It's not the separator. If you had this sensation, if you were able to be conscious of time as being a seamless backdrop to what happens in the city, that is, what happens in human consciousness, if I may quote myself, and I don't see why not, that sure would explain a lot. That sure would explain a lot. That sure would explain a lot. At the 4D level, all the 3D stuff indeed would run together. And that's why it needs to be separated, the human consciousness. It would all run together. There would be no this and that. There'd be no contours. There'd be no frontiers. There would be no sensation between the fish and the water, between I and not I. You would still have the awareness. I don't mean that you have fallen down into some super-duper trance, and that now you're just simply dumb with a turban on instead of just dumb laying in the gutter in the city. You see how things must be separated simply on the basis. On the basis. It's not all that strange. It's not all that complex. On the basis that human consciousness, the human brain, as it works in the city, as it works now, has to separate things or it can't even talk about it. It cannot think about it. The human mind, intelligence, the brain, consciousness would not function, would not be serving the purpose it must function unless time seemed to separate everything. Unless there seemed to be the sense of relationship, which I have already pointed out, and I'll quote myself again. Great source of quotes that I am. That ordinary consciousness can only perceive relations. That's it. That's it. When you begin to understand that, you understand why it struck so many of you as being true, valid, correct. Whether you understood why or whether you saw any further implications of it, of me pointing out this continual sense of frontiers and contours. Because if consciousness is dealing that everything is in relationship, that everything is relationships, then you've got to have the frontiers. There has got to be the division. There has got to be the separation between everything. Not just physically, because it's not going to change that there is a physical separation between this and the thing it's laying on. In the 3D world, that's it. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no profit to even question that any further. When I talk about the city now, I'm talking about in here. The sensation that there is a separation, and they are separated in time, at the very basic level. Do you not see that as being a kind of ultimate self-serving again? The sense human consciousness cannot think of but one thing at a time, then everything has got to be separated by time. And you tell me that ordinary people don't know what they're doing. Tut tut. Life has made ordinary people know quite well what they're doing. They just don't like it. I can't think of more than one thing at a time, and therefore, wait a minute, I'll give you my attention on that in just a second. All right, I thought about that. Now, what was you going to tell me? And then you think about that. And we've got the what? The great Charlie Whiz-Bang line. Linear thought. That time does separate things. You can only deal with one thing at a time. Now, if you can only deal with one thing at a time, you can't deal with this. Because you're always dealing with the then I wills. And I don't bring this up to attack it as an excuse. It is the operations of human intellect. It is the molecular movement inside the human brain of then I will. Let me ask you a question. Wait just a minute. I was talking to him, all right? Okay, all right, now ask me. All right. As soon as I get through talking to him, then I'll listen to you. When I get through worrying about this, then I'll think about that. When I get through suffering over this, then I'll think about not suffering. If everything ran together, as they call it in the 3D world, if everything was running together, you would then be dealing with, you would be in a state of, you would be in touch with more complex consciousness. Why can't you deal, I guess we will have to consider this rhetorical for the night since I can't go into it much further, we're running out of time, but why can you not deal, that is the human intellect? Those people that believe that they are God's grand creation, which, you know, they may be. But those who say that and then say, wait a minute, I can't deal with one thing at a time. Then why did these forces, these gods, create its grand thing, man, and its brain can only deal with one thing at a time when, if you have noticed, any of you who are very perceptive, in the world, more than one thing at a time goes on. Now, I hope this doesn't come as a shock to some of you right here just before the weekend that were perhaps going out of town. Just about all the time, all right, possibly just about all the time, in life, if not the universe, the city, if not everywhere, it seems possible for me to say that there's more than one thing going on at a time, a whole lot of the time. So why is it that this only deals with one thing at a time? Why it says that I can only deal with one thing at a time? I'm going to have to hint to you right quickly one more time. I've been trying for the last few nights to get you closer and closer. The examples, and some of them seem far removed from each other, of me playing this equals that, and then me saying, well, wait a minute, it's not synonymous. It's not just philosophical. That there's not any real word for it. All I can do is tell you that actions and consequences, causes and effects are the same thing. And that doesn't even begin to cover it. But they're the same thing. They're not synonymous. And it's not that the cause of one thing that seems to be the effect in another time, and that the effect of one thing is then the cause of something else. Because then you're still on the gee whiz Charlie track. You're still on linear thought. It's not that. And they're not separate in time. It's not to say, well, all right, now, he called me a son of a bitch. All right, let's say that was the cause. I perceived it as the cause, and then I got mad. How fast? Real fast. As soon as I heard it. That's too late. You can't say, well, wait a minute. And it's no sort of, you all should know this. Even if you've seen 2 or 3 tapes, you must know that I'm unreasonable enough to put up with this. It does not mean that in some way you go, well, wait a minute. Perhaps I brought it on myself. Because I thought evil of him. I spoke about him in an ill manner 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I bet it got back to him. If it didn't, at least karma's paying me off. It ain't that. It's that time did not separate the two. Something didn't happen and cause you to do so-and-so. Forget any kind of explanation. Forget the so-called attempted rationalization of saying, all right, I know what you mean. It didn't actually cause me. No, you don't know what I mean. It's not that. To say that one equals the other, if we weren't limited to 3D things, see, I would put the then I was is equal now, and you'd take them and you'd go, and you'd run them all together. Just like that Sandel-Shod physicist said, time's what keeps everything from running together. He'd be right. Is you'd take all these letters, and of course the reality, and you'd take equals now, and you'd take now, and you'd take this, and you'd go, and you'd just be a jumble, right? You couldn't make out what the hell it was, unless you're going to play anagrams. You just jumble it all together, and then it'd be, Of course, from there it could be one dangerous step. Some of you might take the final dangerous step, which I certainly wouldn't want to happen. And then you'd see that, well, Jesus. So. Let me remind you from several weeks back where I was leading some of this in general. Where it seems to be the frontiers, where it seems to be that you can spot where things should be overlapping, which obviously are those areas that human consciousness, the brain says, well, there's 2 distinct choices. There are 2 opposites. You have got to find holes. And holes are always in fair season where the overlapping occurs. You've got to find the hole. There's no amount of information already available laying there on the fabric that's going to give you what you're looking for. That is, no theoretical discussion from now on about the battle between right and wrong, or good and evil. There's no way to think your way out of it. There's no way to pray your way out of it, no way to chant your way out of it. You've got to find a hole. And you've got to be able to go there and look through the hole. It is then that you begin to see that there is a multi-dimensional, a higher dimensional reality, and you can begin to see the holes right where things seem to have frontiers, right where there seems to be a contour between this and that. Whatever the this and that is, it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter whether it seems to be out there, or of course of real importance, in there. And with that, let me remind you, real extraordinary information, revolutionary, fresh data, this stuff, when it seems that the time is just right, that the humidity the speed limit, and everything to where something seems to happen from me talking and you listening. Is it real fresh information, whether it seems to come from me or whether it starts coming from you, is not new things, it's new holes in old things. That's all it is. All the ideas that you have heard put down into the 3D lexicons and books of these people having enlightenment, people perceiving higher areas of reality. It was not new information, which, if I got to point out again, is one of the problems, just one of these accidental, not mainline in the revolutionary sense, of people having this occur, and then they come back and say, all I can tell you is extraordinary, all I can tell you is I would cough my right foot if I could have stayed there, and after taking all that, I can't really tell you what the hell it was. I made some notes here, and I look at it now, and it's gibberish. I don't even want to read it to you because it doesn't make any sense to me. Or some of it makes sense, but it's just childish. It's just garbage. I don't know what happened. Because nothing, in a sense, new took place in their nervous system. Not based upon the old data, that is, the old nervous system. It was not that the old nervous system turned around on itself and looked and went, ah, there's stuff I didn't know. It was holes. There was holes in the old stuff, and you saw how the old stuff is actually connected. The stuff at different places in the nervous system has different places in what seems to be your memory, your perception of what's going on. That these so-called new ideas are not really new ideas, they're new holes in old stuff. And it would not be inappropriate to give you one final reminder, speaking of it instead of just ideas, as maps. Because there's only one real kind of revolutionary map, and that's a map that's got no border to it. Literally. It can't have. You cannot be a pillar in the auditorium of spontaneous education. If you got a map with boundaries, you got an opinion that doesn't have its coeval partner, and you're not being fair. And everybody believes in fairness. If you got a map with boundaries, then you've got a piece of paper that's got edges, and that won't do. You're still looking at information. You're still looking at your own perception of what's going on. You're still looking at your own self-analyzation, as though, all right, this stuff I may enlarge upon this, and I hope I do, and I hope my knowledge of all this becomes better. And perhaps I'll turn the page. You're dealing with maps that's already got boundaries. You believe, in the sense, that it could be put down on 3D objects like paper. And of course, the mind can't conceive of paper without an edge to it. But you're not dealing with real information. You're not dealing with a real map. As long as you perceive that it has boundaries. Because as long as it got boundaries, then you can always play with the then I wills. Because, all right, maybe my maps have boundaries. Well, when I get to them, then I will move on. No, you won't. You'll stay there. As long as you got any perception, and everybody's got perceptions of this, but until you can free yourself from it, but as long as you go by your perceptions of, I know what I'm doing, I know where this is going, you're full of shit. You don't know where this is going, you never have known where this is going. The only reason you're still here, and something that you got any sanity, is that you like what's happened thus far. But for me to play some game and say, well, everybody write me and tell me, where do you think this is going? How do you know I don't just, every now and then need a good belly laugh? I don't, because I got all the belly laughs I can use. But you don't know where this is going. If you knew where this is going, you'd be there. I'm, again, not playing with words to say that the only revolutionary map is one with no borders. If it was on a piece of paper, it'd have no edge, and of course, to the mind, that's impossible. We're playing around with some kind of, if I mean anything, I must have in mind some mathematical model that does not exist. All right. But what you've got to see is, as long as all of your perceptions of reality, as long as your nervous system is boxed in to where it was built, to where it was produced here, that you have a distinct sensation. You don't normally analyze it, but you have a distinct sensation of, yes, I know where this is going. Well, I may not know exactly what you think, that is me, where I think I'm going to take you, but you know where it's going. You do not. Or that, yes, I'm beginning to have some pretty clear idea of what this is about. You are crazy. You don't have any idea what this is about. What it's about is normally an hour and a half a night that we meet. That's what it's about. It's about you showing up and me talking. And it's about me saying, go try so-and-so. And it's about sometimes you go try it. That's what it's about. But you don't know what it's about. The nervous system doesn't know what it's about. And you're just limiting yourself in a way that can be serious after a certain length of time, of not perceiving that you are carrying around continually, although it seems to change to you, and many of you will take credit that you changed it, that my map is bigger, I have more information. When I started out, I had one sheet of instructions and ideas about life I trusted. But now, being around here, I've got 3. And if I get 4, then I'll really be somewhere. You'll be a person with 4 maps. A good map has no boundary. This is getting very close to a reality behind the word spontaneous. What if there was an ability, you couldn't see it all, but what if there was an ability for me to drag down some spontaneity and make it evident in the 3D world? And what if I were to start doing it? Does anybody want to see it? What if I could give you, I couldn't give you the full thing because the real spontaneity is everything else would be tied at least to one more dimension. And so you couldn't bring the full thing here. But if I said, all right, I could give you a non-routine display of it, would you want to see it? And before you answer, how about this? How the hell do you know you hadn't seen it? How do the hell you don't, would you be sure that you don't see it all the time? Speaking of being spontaneous, somebody hand me those notes I wrote about that. You better watch it.